everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of Human Element. Today I'm speaking with Christopher Budd, founder and principal of Christopher Budd Communications. Christopher, thanks for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me. How are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good.
All right. Would you start by sharing a bit of your journey so far?
Sure. So I have been in security for over 20 years. Let's just leave it at that. I got into security kind of sideways. I started life as a developer, actually, and then got into networking back in the early days of the internet and then slid into security that way. My trial by fire in security was 10 years at Microsoft in the Security Response Center. So I always say average lifespan in the MSRC, especially in those days, was 2 years, and I lasted 10 with a couple of breaks. So I helped build the global security incident response process, the privacy incident response process, and led the response for a number of things. I was involved with NIMDA, Conficker, things like that. Since then, I've worked for a handful of security companies, and most recently just wrapped up 3 years at Sophos, building and leading the XOps comms analysis and research group. So I've been all over the place. I've done help desk, I've done development. I've worn just about every hat that you can.
Sounds cool. So would you tell me about a few events that have shaped your leadership style?
I would say the first most notable event that I can cite is NIMDA back in 2001. Now, for those who may not remember, or in some cases I'm discovering in our industry, may not have even been born when NIMDA happened. Mm-hmm. This was back in 2001. This was literally 1 week after 9/11. And NIMDA was a network-based attack against a networking component in Microsoft Windows. Mm-hmm. The NIMDA attack, this is back in the days when the worst things attackers did was bring networks down because of traffic. It was more mischief than malice. No money was involved in those days. Yeah. But 1 week after 9/11, everyone first thinks that it's related to 9/11. And the second day of the NIMDA attacks, I remember my grand boss coming out of his office in Building 5 saying, "Oh, I just got off the phone with the White House, and they're asking, what are we going to do when the internet crashes?" This was back in the days when about 90% of the stuff plugged into the internet was Microsoft stuff. And so we had, as we called it, a special responsibility, which was kind of our code for, yes, we're a monopoly, to protect things. So bearing that responsibility and dealing with what we dealt with in those days, you learn how to deal with crises on a massive scale. And one thing that you get is perspective. And what I mean by that is very often in a crisis, and people who live in instant response know this as well as anyone. In a crisis, your options very often are bad or worse. Mm-hmm. And if you are successful, you are going to get the bad outcome, not the worst outcome, the bad outcome. And when you do, that's a success. That's great. But the other thing you learn is to the outside world, all they see is it's a bad outcome. And so one thing that you learn from that is the people that you are working to protect very often don't understand what you're doing, what you're going through.
Or what you saved from.
Exactly. Actually, another example, I once had a case. So when you're in the response center back in those days, you often dealt with the security researchers who found the vulnerabilities. And I always said doing that, you had to be part FBI profiler, part hostage negotiator. Because people are coming in saying, "Hey, I have this flaw in Microsoft software, and I can do XYZ bad things with it." Well, the hostage negotiator part of this is, please don't take this public. Let us come up with a fix so that we can protect people. Mm-hmm. One of the cases that I had, the researcher was feeling unhappy with how long it was taking, because you'd be surprised how long it takes to build a patch for stuff at Microsoft. And we can talk about why that is if you want. But on a Friday afternoon, I got what I lovingly refer to as the Say Your Prayers Rabbit email, if you've ever watched Bugs Bunny. Yeah. And this was the email that basically says, "You're taking too long. We're going to go public with everything in 3 hours. Please get back to us." So I get on the phone.
4 p.m. on Friday?
Yeah, it actually was 2 p.m. Pacific time, but 4 p.m.'s coming. I get on the phone with them, and I spend literally the next 2 hours talking with them, explaining, okay, look, here's why it takes 6 weeks to build a patch, because there's actually not one version of Office. This was an Office issue. Not one version of Office. We got 2 separate products, Office for Windows, Office for Mac, completely different. We have 3 versions of each, so now we have 6 versions. We have 27 languages. We have to build an installer plus the fix and, do the math. This grows exponentially. Mm-hmm. After 2 hours, they're like, okay, you know what? We think you're idiots, but we're not going to go public. You can build your patch. I take my headphones off. I hang them up. I go, and then I realize nothing bad is going to happen. And no one in the world, except me and the 2 researchers I was on the phone with, and now your listeners, will ever know that nothing bad happened because we did something. And that goes back to your point that very often people outside of what we do don't know what we do. And that brings us, I think, to something that I think is important in this space, which is the eternal difficulty in justifying resources for what we do. Mm-hmm. Because, we're in in security, and especially like incident response and things like this, we're in the same problem space as insurance, which is we're asking people to spend money, spend resources, and when they do it successfully, nothing bad happens. And so it becomes very easy when people understandably decide to cut costs and be efficient to look at the line item and say, I'm spending this much and nothing happened. Well, how do you prove that this money was well spent? I went out and bought a crystal pet rock at the same time that I built this team up, and nothing happened. How do I know it's not the crystal pet rock that did it?
Yeah, there's some interesting potential there from a financial perspective. Yeah, let's just turn that off and see what happens. And
mm-hmm. Yeah, and frankly, that's one thing that we're seeing. I mean, literally right now, and we started seeing it when Musk took over Twitter. Mm-hmm. And he started cutting. And I'm going to be the first to say, I expected to see more failures at Twitter than we have with that amount of cost cutting and staff cutting. But we know that when you cut like this, eventually there will be a butcher's bill to pay.
It will eventually catch up with you. It's out there.
It will. I mean, we call it technical debt for a reason.
There is interest. Absolutely. I will say, so you mentioned NIMDA. I was working at the NOC at Global Crossing in that time frame. So there's a period that I don't know if I vividly remember it or try to block most of it out. But we had 9/11. I was just, my folks who were in New York the night before were just about home, and NIMDA hit. And
it was a different world then.
Yeah.
In terms of the types of attacks. I don't want to say it was a better world or a worse world. It was different, but those were the days when we were looking at networks crashing because of attacks against vulnerabilities. I still remember, it wasn't Conficker, I can't recall which one it was, but I still remember watching CNN live on the air, and they're talking about how their networks are crashing because of a Microsoft vulnerability that was network-based and being attacked. Mind you, we were all shaking our heads because this was something that we had the patch out for about 6 weeks, and so CNN was essentially broadcasting live how slow they were to patch, which is not a good look. But
in that era, Patch Tuesday was, if I recall correctly, just starting to become a thing, and people were just starting to be comfortable with the idea that the curation of these patches is getting to the point where I'm probably safer applying the patch than waiting to see what happens to other people. But there was definitely a calculus to do there of, is this going to be worse or better than the vulnerability, at least from the outside?
Right. And by the way, I don't think I mentioned I helped build Patch Tuesday as well.
Oh, cool.
It's funny because, I remember, so for the folks that may not have, been alive before Patch Tuesday, the way it used to work was we would build the fix, and when the fix was ready, we would put it on the download center, publish the bulletin. And so there was no warning to anyone. You didn't know when they were coming. One day you might wake up and find, no patches that day. One morning you might wake up and find, there's one popped up at 2:00 Eastern time. And then poof, another one popped up at 4:00 Eastern time. We started a conscious project to try and make it a little more predictable. One of my colleagues described the whole process back in those days as it was like having a hand grenade land in your inbox unexpectedly.
Yeah.
But, going back to what that was like, though, one thing that was different compared to the ransomware attacks that we have today is, ransomware takes out an entity, an organization, very bad, obviously. But in these instances, we were seeing, whole cities, whole sectors, complete networks, internetworks being taken down.
Yeah, I don't know if it's a factor of the financial impact where it's more lucrative to actually target individuals, or if networking has just gotten that much more secure, which I have a hard time believing because, I know a thing or two about the protocols underlying it and have a hard time imagining that it's actually more secure. But yeah, it's changed.
I think 30 years on, we at least have gotten people to block RPC at the perimeter finally.
It's a common thing to do. I'll give you that.
Yeah. But it's, this goes back to, the evolution on the adversary side.
Sure.
It's gone from mischief, a combination of mischief, hey, can I do this, to how can I monetize this, to what we have now, which is kind of big criminal business.
Yeah.
Some of the research when I was at Sophos most recently, my team did a bunch of research on the threat actor underground and what people on that side are actually doing in those spaces. And our research, and we've seen this with others, shows that there's a high degree of professionalization that's going on. I think one of the most interesting things is about a year and a half ago, we did some research after the Las Vegas casino hacks, where we saw threat actor groups kind of sniping at each other in public over credit. With my combination of communications and technical background, I went to one of the guys on my team that does this research and said, hey, can you go look and see, because it feels to me like the threat actors are kind of doing something similar to what I did, which is kind of pivoting and taking the hacking knowledge that they gained on the technical side and starting to apply it in the communications world, because communications is a system and hacking is about systems. It's not inherently technical systems. And so he went and looked and found that, yes, indeed, threat actor groups, they're advertising for communications people. They are using communications tactics that are proven to be effective in the day world for their purposes. And this all points to that growing professionalization. We've seen from some of the leaks out of these groups, they basically have HR departments, they have legal departments.
They have IT teams. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think anyone's actually answered this, but it wouldn't surprise me if they have benefits packages too.
Oh, they do.
Oh, there you go.
I have definitely seen, handbooks and onboarding material. They absolutely, wow. And, if you look at it, it seems like they've got, professional people doing those roles to the point where they may be able to argue, hey, I'm just an HR person, and what they do, what the company actually produces is irrelevant, is not directly related to what I'm doing. You got to wonder if there's some plausible deniability built in there. Hey, I'm just an IT support person. When a customer calls, I walk through the run book. I'm not committing crime over here.
That does raise an interesting question. I'm just, it's a variation on I'm just following orders.
Yeah, exactly.
But when you go back to your time at, where was it, Global Crossing?
Yep.
Yeah. You go back to Global Crossing in 2001. I go back to Microsoft in 2001. Would we have believed that things would evolve to a point where we have well-financed adversaries and well-organized to such a degree that they arguably, this is something else, and work that you and I did together at Trend, we even saw this. in some cases, they have support for the victims because getting people to pay through Bitcoin is hard. Very often they have better support than legitimate software companies do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Would I have believed it if you told me at the time? Probably not. It follows. I mean, it makes rational, logical sense how we got there. But I think at the time I was hoping we were actually going to fix this thing. But let's solve this security problem.
Yeah. Well, that you've raised a really good point, and a good question, which is, are we going to fix this? I remember in 2006, I was at Microsoft and we got a press inquiry that came in because Gates had promised that spam back in 1996, I think Gates had promised spam would be solved in 10 years. And the reporter was saying, hey, it's been 10 years. Has spam been solved? Well, obviously it wasn't then.
It's not now.
No.
By my inbox this morning.
Oh my goodness, no. And so, we joke about job security. Are we going to have job security or are we going to solve this?
Well, I think the new question there is, what is AI going to do to job security? But that could be a whole nother session.
Yeah. Well, I think, I can't remember if I've told you, but, for what it's worth, my view on AI is that there is practical AI and then there's hyped AI.
Mm-hmm.
Practical AI, I use a visual cinematic metaphor to explain what good practical AI is. You've seen Aliens, right?
Mm-hmm.
The loaders that they use in Aliens?
Yeah.
I say that's a good visual metaphor for good practical AI because those loaders don't replace people.
Right.
At all. You still have a human being. They just increase the capability of those people because everything that I've seen and we're starting to see this in some of the studies that are coming out where people talk about their satisfaction with AI, where they use it successfully. It's right on that mark. Where it's best and most effective is as a tool in the hands of someone who already has capability and expertise, and it enables them to do more by automating some of the mundane stuff that saves them time, and frankly enables them to focus on the higher brain functions that the AI can't do.
I saw a meme the other day about how do I get AI to do my dishes and laundry so I can focus on the creative important work I want to deal with.
Exactly. And it's funny because I've been very skeptical about AI in no small part because companies have been just jamming it frankly down our throats.
It's been the buzzword of RSA and Black Hat for the last few years now.
Yeah, and you use an Office Suite product and you spin it up one day and you find that AI has been enabled and turned on without your asking for it, without notice, without your consent. Who knows what's happening to your information as it's being sent up to their giant data lake, etc. Those are things that make me not happy. But I have been playing with AI and I'm finding specific use scenarios exactly like we're talking about where it is good, which is too bad. It's too bad that companies are taking that jam it down your throat approach because there's a Pew Trust survey that just came out about 4-6 weeks ago. Have you seen this?
No.
Talking about people's trust attitudes towards AI. And the numbers are surprisingly negative, I think, for the leaders that are pushing AI. And they're negative in two areas. Now, one area is negative in the classic, oh my God, it's going to take my job worry sense.
Mm-hmm.
But the other area where it's negative is people don't trust it. They have concerns about the reliability. They have concerns about data security. They have concerns about it being forced upon them. The first problem is more of a policy societal problem. It's not one that technology leaders can solve. That second one, though, entirely concerns that people can solve.
Mm-hmm.
If we bring the principles, I have a privacy background as well. If we bring the principles of good privacy practice to bear, we do proper notice as far as here's what it does, here's what data we're using, here's what we're using it for, here's how you can delete it. We get proper consent. Hey, before you use Microsoft Bob, do you want to turn on Bob++? Yes or no? If we do those things, then people, I think, will be warmer to it, and they can and they can see the benefits of it. And so, as someone who has a fundamental love and interest in technology, even though I've got some jaded edges after 30 years of fixing problems, I wish we would be doing more of that as an industry, because then people would be less hostile. And that, I think, is something important. I don't know what you're seeing. I am seeing in the trenches among both regular users and very technical people, a certain degree of just downright anger and hostility towards AI in a way that I have not seen towards other technologies. Now, some of that I think goes to the, oh God, it's going to replace me scenarios. Definitely. But I think a lot of it also goes to the, hey, don't force this on us. I want to know what's happening.
Yeah. All right. So tell me about a mistake that led you to significant personal growth.
As far as a mistake that has caused a degree of personal growth, I'm going to fudge it a little bit and say that the mistake here that I'm thinking of is I once believed a product team when we had a patch that was broken, and they said, we will have a fixed patch in a week. And in my role as a spokesperson, I went out and said, okay, we will have it in a week. And guess what? It wasn't ready in a week.
No.
And so making a promise and not delivering that promise made the situation so much worse than it would have been if I had simply said, we'll do it when it's ready. And what I learned from that is a combination of, in crisis communications, is a combination of be very conservative about what you promise people, only promise things that you are absolutely sure you can deliver, and to understand the role that expectation has with people in a crisis. One of the things that, focusing on the communication side of things, one of the things that I learned is managing people in panic. Because, in the type of crises, in the Conficker type crises, the NIMDA type crises, you're dealing with panic. Mm-hmm. And understanding how to responsibly take control and keep people assured. It's not in the job description. I've actually never seen it in any crisis manager or crisis comms job description, but that's actually one of your chief roles is to be the dispeller of panic. And so understanding how expectation and missed expectations feeds into that is a really key thing. And that one instance that I'm talking about really taught me a lot, about managing expectation and how you need to be aware of, not just the truth of a matter, but what people are expecting, the plausibility, how they're going to hear it.
Is there an individual who altered the trajectory of your career?
Yeah, I would say an individual that altered the trajectory of my career would be my manager at the response center back in the 2001 era. So it was Scott Culp, who helped me understand that in this space, sometimes when you do the right thing, you're not going to get support and appreciation from the people that you're doing it for, and how to find the strength and courage to live through those situations. He took a lot of heat from people in the industry, who were more on the full disclosure side. I do not want to revisit the disclosure wars of the 2000s, please.
Agreed.
But being at Microsoft and with a vendor, we had a certain stance on disclosure. Mm-hmm. And our stance was pragmatically grounded in terms of what we thought protected people best. And he took a lot of heat within the industry, but he handled it with a degree of grace. And most importantly, we accomplished the mission over the years. It's funny because those were hard times in a different way than the times are hard now. And I think one thing that we find in security is, I think it's a truism now, it's just always going to be a hard time. There's always, and I think this comes back to my question to you, are we going to solve it? I don't think we're ever going to solve it, because we haven't solved crime yet. We still have crime today. We had crime in ancient Rome in 43 BC. We still have it today. This is basically what we're dealing with is an extension of crime into the technological world. And so as long as we have crime, we're going to have these problems.
Unfortunately, I think that's fair. So one of the key things when you're building up a team is trust. How do you build the trust into your teams?
Yes. And not just with teams, but when you're an organization, I think that trust is the single most important thing for any company in the security and privacy space. At the end of the day, people are going to buy based on trust in most cases more than anything. Yes, price is part of it, but paying $10 for something that you don't trust versus $100 for something you do trust, most people are going to go for the $100 for the thing that you do trust, because they recognize if something is untrustworthy, that $10 is actually going to turn into $1,000 when it breaks down. And building, the saying about trust, it's hard to build, easy to lose, is true.
Yep.
And a key part of building trust is understanding expectations, understanding what people need to hear, want to hear, and delivering on that in a credible, honest way.
So I'm curious, can you think of a moment that defined your passion for cybersecurity or solidified it?
I can. And I'm going to get like super personal here, but maybe that's a good thing. So my father was actually in the Marines. And he was a drill sergeant. He went to Vietnam. I did not know my father. We won't get into this. But I had a day in the mid-2000s when I was at Microsoft, and I was sitting in my office, and I was in the middle of yet another one of these horrible crises. And I had come to realize, by that point, I knew how hard this job was for everyone. In fact, I was the person, when we would hire people, I was the person that you got sent to in the hiring loop with two purposes. My first purpose was to try and scare you away appropriately. My second purpose was to see if you had that internal something to do this job. Because one thing I've said is, with incident response, with this type of work, you have to have something in here. Because there are days when the people you're doing it for, and I've alluded to this, the people you're doing it for are going to be the ones throwing rocks at you. You're not going to get support and kudos from those people. In those days, to get up and do what needs to be done, you need to have something here that's driving you. And I was sitting in my office somewhat reflecting on that and the fact that I have this thing myself. And you know how service tends to run in families? You have multiple generations of people in the military, multiple generations of people who are police officers. Yep. And I had never felt any connection with my father. But then I had this moment of realizing, I get up, I do this thing. And I do it because I have this thing that makes me do it. And I thought to myself, maybe this is, maybe service does run in families, in generations, and maybe this is my version of it. So, now, we haven't talked about this, but this makes me aware of kind of a flip side that we haven't talked about, and I don't think we talk about enough as an industry, and that is the downside of having that is that drive can drive you to burnout.
Sure can.
Because that drive will give you the drive to put up with very hard, difficult circumstances for a long period of time. And sometimes the best people, the people that have that drive the most, are the ones that will bend and bend and bend and not break, and bend so much that it causes actually more harm long term than if they had just broken quickly.
Pretzel comes out the other end because they're
right.
Too flexible. Yeah.
Right. And, I'm part of the community. You're part of the community. I will say one thing these days that I'm seeing is a whole lot of discussion around burnout. And, and it's hard to objectively measure these things, but based on what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, I think burnout is a bigger problem right now than it has been for a long time.
I agree. I think it's a massive problem, and I'm actually really excited to see a lot more talk about it. And, I don't know that it ever really had stigma per se in the cyberspace. I mean, I think it's always been something that's been there in the background, but it's good to see that people kind of talking openly and
No, I think there's maybe not a stigma around it, but I think there is, and this is another place where our industry, especially the incident response side, I think has some similarity to the services, if you will.
Yeah.
And that is there is an extolling of the virtue of toughness.
Yep. Sure.
I've described it sometimes as a bit of competitive masochism. Who can take more punishment?
Sure.
If I had $1 for every time in the war rooms someone said, "I'll sleep when I'm dead."
You may get your wish sooner than you'd like. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, and and let's be clear. Not to be a downer, but there are people that I've worked with that are dead now, literally. And and I can trace it to the job. We don't talk about burnout. We don't talk about substance abuse. We don't talk about mental health issues. I've somewhat jokingly say, 10 years in the response center, and and I said this at the beginning, and actually there's a little bit of that kind of competitive masochism, because remember I said, average lifespan is 2 years. I did 10. There is a little bit of, I took a lot of punishment in that time, but I always say 10 years in that space at Microsoft, for instance, I have an intimate relationship with burnout, both myself and with others. One story I tell is I remember sitting during one of our crisis meetings, across the table from someone that I had worked with for years, and I looked at them. I'm like, oh boy, they are not looking good. They are not looking good at all. And 6 weeks later, they quit with no place to go. They had reached their kind of burnout point.
Yeah. So I was debating asking you this, but I'll throw it out there anyway. You did say 10 years, where the median tenure is 2 years. What does that say about you, and what have you learned since then about dealing with that?
What does that say about me? It says that I believe in the mission. It says that I stick to things. It says that I probably am one of those people that stick to it too long. It says that I have learned a lot in those 10 years about the importance of not losing yourself, in that calling and that mission. I'll be upfront and say, I left after 10 years. When I left Microsoft, I said that I was leaving because I felt like I was becoming that cop that's been on the job too long, and has reached kind of a mental burnout place where they start to feel anger and frustration at the people they're there to protect. I also am upfront with people that I moved on from Microsoft in part because my wife at the time, and that saying at the time may be a tip to some of the costs. My wife at the time, when we were walking our dogs, said, "I want you to quit." And I said to her, "You mean that my leaving is more important than keeping our current lifestyle and family income?" And she said, "Yes." Now, since I left, I have not been in the hot seat to that degree. I've done work in other areas. Occasionally I've gotten pulled in on crises, but I don't know if I would get back in the hot seat. I will say it still has attraction. And that's one of the other challenges I think we have, is that those of us that are in that space, there's a degree to which we really like it. I have to say, there is no satisfaction in the world that quite matches that of when the crisis is over and you are through the post-crisis crash, of saying the world didn't end, people are safe, things are at least okay, because I did this, that, and the other, and we did this, that, and the other. I think, kind of to your point, one of the things that it says also is I do have that thing inside, but after 10 years, I've learned I need to be careful with it.
Definitely. So what signs of burnout do you look for in the team?
The biggest sign that I look for, again, I'm going to go back to Aliens. There's the scene in the tank, basically, after they've escaped, after the big shootout and slaughter, and Hicks comes to Ripley. They're not moving anymore, and he tells her, "Okay, back off. You're just grinding gears now." Do you know the scene I'm talking about? Yeah. I look for that in people more than anything, which is the moment where they are continuing to push, but they don't need to, and it's not getting them anywhere. That's usually a sign that you've slid into blinders
Mhm.
and the event is driving you rather than you driving the event. Other things to watch for, personality changes, people getting short, burnout manifests physically. It's harder to see on a Zoom
Mhm.
than in person, but just looking at people, see how they're carrying themselves, they're hunched, they've got bags under the eyes, a more pessimistic than normal sense of humor as well.
And that's gotta be tricky to detect in security people.
Oh, it is. It is. I mean, like and you'll note that's why I said more pessimistic than
Right.
usual.
Yeah.
Because I don't know if you watched MASH growing up, but
Oh, yeah.
we all, I think, have a certain MASH sense of humor in this space because you need to. When I left Microsoft, by the way, my note saying goodbye to everyone was titled "Goodbye, Farewell, and Amen."
I've done that.
But
I've done
yeah,
exactly that.
yeah, but seeing it get even more pessimistic, and this is where I think some degree of emotional intelligence, some degree of just understanding of some of the warning signs. I think another one that is easy to overlook is substance abuse. I don't think there's enough discussion about, frankly, how much people drink and use other substances. I'm not a fan of Black Hat, for instance, for many reasons, but I think it is a little concerning just how central heavy alcohol intake is at major security conferences.
Yeah, definitely observed that. And I've noticed over the years, my tolerance and interest in that has definitely tapered off as I've aged. But yeah, I mean, looking back over the years, there have been many late nights with many, many beverages.
Yeah. But, kind of bringing this all back. So, so to kind of make this more positive, as someone that has seen all of this over the years, I've used that to inform how I approach things as a manager. So the team that I ran at Sophos, for instance, one thing, and I think my folks from those days would attest to this. One thing, for instance, that I was very vehement about is when you are off, you are off.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell people, I do not want to, you're on vacation. I do not want to hear from you. And I would say I have two business reasons for this. This isn't just me being a nice person. I have two business reasons. Business reason number one, if you burn out, you're useless to me. Reason two, and I don't think people think about this, and I think this is a good one. Reason two, this is how we stress test for resilience, because it is bad for
we operate as an organization without you.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a business risk. I don't care what your industry is. There is a business risk for any organization if you have any one person that if they are not there, the whole thing collapses.
Yep.
That's not to say that people are replaceable, are simple commodities to be replaced, because I don't believe that. But organizations have to be able to survive, at least, if someone is not present. And as much as we like to think that we are so important that everything will collapse without us, that is that is the express lane to burnout. And so telling people, I need you to be off. I need you to be off so that you can rest, but also so that I can see firsthand where the cracks might be, so that, if you get a better offer and you go somewhere else, I know where I as leadership have failed to balance and provide backup and account for cross training and things like that. You and I have talked about with tabletop exercises the importance of throwing wrenches in.
Mm-hmm.
When I've done these at Microsoft, for instance, we've done things where you've got everyone ready. You walk up to someone, congratulations, Alice. For the purposes of this exercise, you are in Vail, Colorado, and there is no cell reception. Please leave the room.
Yep. If you could go back in time, say 20, 25 years, and offer yourself one piece of advice, what would it be?
Learn the value of perspective and patience. I'm not sure if that counts as two, but I'm a big fan. I think I've mentioned this. I'm a big fan of the importance of history in our space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big fan of that because we are in such a new discipline relative to other disciplines out there that it's hard to have perspective. And, I have a joke that I tell about this where I say, before my years with the response center, I used to worry a lot. I don't worry as much as I did because thanks to those years in the response center, I can look at something and say, you know what? That is not the end of the world. You know how I know that? I know that because I know what the end of the world looks like, and it always has the words Internet and Explorer in it. Now, all joking aside, there is truth to that because I have seen what true, what's going to happen when the internet crashes. I've lived through that. That gives perspective, and so getting perspective is helpful. To understand and navigate things. Patience is important because, and that's kind of antithetical to an industry that moves as fast as this does. But at the end of the day, no matter how fast the technology moves, we're still dealing, the technology interacts with people. People move at their pace. They take time. They take time to figure things out. They take time to adjust to things. And no amount of aggressive pushing, this kind of brings me back to what we were talking about with the AI. No amount of aggressive pushing is going to make them go any faster. And so patience is important to get, to help you get to where you want to get to. You push too hard, too fast, people dig their heels in.
So how do you detect when you need to step back and get perspective?
That's one of the big challenges. That goes back to the Ripley, you're grinding the gears. When you need to do it, you're typically in the least able to. Frankly, this is where having a support network, having people that you can lean on in a good way is helpful. Getting someone else's point of view, getting someone else's perspective is good. I can try to make myself do that sometimes. I think the more experience you have, the easier it is to recognize, I've got the blinders on, I need to step away. But we are all still subject to the vicissitudes of our moods, brain chemistry, anxieties. And so getting help is, and actually I just realized, I think this is a broad message that we can use in this space. Getting help is a good thing. You don't have to solve the problem yourself, whatever the problem is. And that's where another way perspective comes into play. I think understanding that asking for someone to assist, getting someone else's point of view, recognizing that someone else may have the answer is perfectly fine. In fact, it's smart. It's sometimes smarter to go and get the answer from someone else than to be the one that has the answer. And that's something that I've learned as a manager. I reached a point where, as a manager, where I knew what my people were good at and I was not. And instead of being threatened by it, I was thankful for it.
So how do you approach mentoring the next generation?
That's a really good question. And that relates to questions that I've seen also about what should people be doing if they're interested in getting into this space. I think mentoring the next generation and helping people get started. I am firmly of the opinion, I'm kind of old school in that I do not have a degree in computer science. I don't have, I have not studied IT or computer science. My bachelor's degree was in comparative religion, with minors in history, anthropology, and an unofficial theater minor. My master's is in philosophy. I think that in mentoring and getting into this space, fostering curiosity and creativity is the most important thing, because the technology changes, the specific technology comes and goes. Being able to have the right perspective and mindset, especially for security, is important. And being able to learn quickly so that you can jump on the next new thing when it comes and get up to speed is most important. So everything that we can do to foster, like I said, that creativity is important. I also think, and I've talked with people about this, I also think that diversity in the true sense is a good thing. because, and I don't mean diversity, with the political sense that we're talking about. I mean, we need people with different perspectives, different points of view, because we need people who have a different way of looking at things to solve the problem. I mean, that's just, having a room full of people who all think the same way, especially in security, is actually really dangerous. You get groupthink and everyone sees the same thing. Well, what is hacking at its heart? Hacking is looking at something and seeing it from a different perspective and figuring out, hey, this thing that was supposed to do X, I can make it do Y. If everyone's looking at it the same way, they're only going to see X. They're not going to see Y.
All right. I strongly agree. I think creativity is an undervalued skill in the space. How do you go about fostering that with your teams?
I think encouraging people to have interests outside of of their day job, outside of that current thing is important. I think understanding the right way for your people, the right way to foster collaboration is important. This kind of brings us to the work from home, return to the office discussion to a degree.
No.
One of the things that I'm also passionate about is I think it's important for business leaders and managers to understand the unique character of people in our industry, and to understand that some of the things that can make people in our industry a challenge from a traditional business management point of view, some of those things are inherent in that quality of creativity. And if you try to enforce conformity, you're going to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. I've seen that many times, and I think that's something that leaders, managers, and organizations need to understand. Again, it comes back to creativity, and fostering that creativity, like you were asking, requires a degree of empathy and understanding, and recognizing that we are all individuals. What works for this person will not work for that person. In fact, what works for them is the exact opposite of what you need for them. And treating people as individuals, understanding what each one needs, and adjusting as appropriate.
Awesome. So unfortunately, that's all the time we've got for today. Before we wrap up, if people want to follow along with your work, where's the best place to go?
Best place is to follow me up on LinkedIn these days. So I'm easy to find there. I am Christopher Budd, and the profile, all one word.
All right. Thank you, Christopher. It's been an awesome conversation. Fascinating, and great talking with you.
Yes, likewise.